Hello everybody, welcome to this video about Aptem and how to comply. So the aim here today is to give you an idea about what Aptem is and learn how to comply and starting to do this. So what is it? Aptem stands for Apprenticeship Management and Delivery System. Here's a little link to the website if you'd like to follow that up, but basically it's talking about enrolling students, meeting Ofsted and DFE requirements, and evidencing progression and completion. So it's a kind of a monitoring system which ensures that all apprentices have met all the relevant professional standards, the hours that they're supposed to complete on the apprenticeship program, whatever one it is, and things of that nature. So it's essentially a monitoring system and something that we must all get used to and work with. So what does everybody have to do? There are 3 tripartite forms or reviews per year. They be signed off by the apprentice, the SRA, or Kingston University tutor, and an employer rep. That employer rep is usually going to be the mentor. You also have to upload your learning logs if you're an apprentice, one for every taught session. That's off-the-job learning. This video will not address that. I have a separate video about how you go about learning logs and things of that nature. So the tripartite reviews, we do 3 every year of your course. And I think really the first review is learning what to do. So you might have to go through it in detail at the start. But later on, you can complete elements of it before the actual review. There needs to be an online meeting with the apprentice mentor and KU. You can't really just tick the boxes because there's conversational elements in this, and you need to meet up to do that. So as I said, for the first reviews, probably a good idea to go through all the sections so everybody's familiar with what is required. But later on, probably be quite time-saving, more effective if you complete elements of the review prior to the actual meeting. I'll go through the process and the various different stages in the review, and I'll point out which parts you can complete in advance, and they'll be marked, as it were, by this little red hand. So this is the console view of Aptem. There is an older version of the program called Aptem Classic, but mainly we'll all be moving over to console in the not too distant future. You may see a slightly different looking version of this, but this will be more or less what you're going to see. So once you have learners, your name is going to appear like this, and there will be a little drop down for accessing the reviews over here on the right hand side. It'll default to dashboard, so don't press enter at this point. Drop down to reviews and click on reviews. This will look like this. You'll have your details, start and end dates of the course, manager or mentor's names, things of that nature, usual kind of basic details that you get in most apps. So let's scroll down and start to fill it in. You'll see a list of planned reviews. These are ones that have not been finished, but if you like, you can also go to finished tab up there and it'll show you what reviews have already been completed. So you find the date nearest to the date that you're looking at the actual form. It's the most nearest date in time to you on the present day, and you press start. Surprise, surprise, really complicated this, isn't it? But now here we get into the meat and drink of the thing. So you'll see that there are several drop-down sections. The first of these is learning progress. Now, learning progress is informed by things like, have you completed assignments? Have you uploaded learning logs? For placements, might be, are you keeping your days and placements going? All of that kind of thing. So that kind of material generates your learning progress. It calculates it for you and will show you your progress on the course. Fairly straightforward. You don't really need to do much with that apart from press the button. The next section is the KSB review progress. So KSB is knowledge, skills, and behavior. I'm sure you know that The apprenticeship standards are divided into knowledge, skills, and behavior, and they map across each other. But you see, the questions are fairly straightforward here. They're asking you what progress you have made in regard to the KSBs since the last review. Now, if it's the first review, you're likely to be doing this at a very early stage in the course, and you might not have a lot to report. But as you progress, and certainly by the second tripartite in your first year of study, you will have things to say here. You don't need a huge amount of detail because you're also providing that information on learning logs and elsewhere. So if you could kind of note the key points for you in these domains, that's really going to cover it. Then we go on to the skill coaches, SRA's comments on KSBs. Skill coach is another word or phrase for university tutor. So obviously this will be done by the Kingston University member of staff rather than yourself. Now, when you're doing reviews, it's going to be the KU staff member who's going to start the review or generate it. You won't have to do that. And in fact, unless the staff member starts that review, you won't be able to enter any information. So we expect KU staff to be doing that promptly to give you a chance to actually enter what you need to do. And of course, they have their own bits here. And they'll probably be informed by what you have said in the previous section about KSBs, and probably conversations, written work, various things will also come into play there. The next section, well, you could do this beforehand because if we establish earlier on that there isn't a need for functional skill support in English and maths, well, then that's likely to continue. It'll be NA or no or something of that nature. You do have to enter something here, but chances are that you will once you said no, it's probably not going to change, although it might do at times. Sometimes people get for example, dyslexia diagnosis later on. So as with all the other sections of this, if there's a little drop down here for complete or incomplete, and if it doesn't automatically generate complete, you just need to drop that down and tick it. Perhaps I should have said that before. There are some core topics. There's an interesting little section of the review. Needs a little bit more time and effort, but as an introductory kind of note about this, there are 5 core topics. They come from the Ofsted inspection framework. So Ofsted, as well as being responsible for inspecting schools, children's services, children's homes. They are also responsible for inspecting all apprenticeship programs, and they come into the universities every so often to do precisely that. So part of the Ofsted framework that they use in all other contexts contains these 5 core topics. There's a bit of a history about where they came from, so on and so forth. I don't suppose we need to detain ourselves with that very much. By this stage, you'll have looked at the slide for long enough to see that there are these 5 things, and there are different ways to fill them in. You might have a more open discussion just between you, the apprentice, the mentor, KU staff member, kind of talking about what these things mean, what do they mean in practice, what learning has the person kind of achieved about these things. And there are also question banks. So these are kind of prompt questions that might be used in the review as a way of kind of generating dialogue and discussion. I will come back to the 5 topics to give some sort of a clue or indication about what you might do when you're coming to complete those sections. There are 2 bits next, is action planning and smart targets. And the question here is, do you need to set an action plan? Now, bear in mind that all apprentices have mentoring agreements, CLE agreements, FPLE agreements, which detail quite a lot of detail, in fact, learning opportunities, reviews of the opportunities, so on and so forth, and mapping progress for on-the-job learning. So here, the action plans may not be as detailed as what you do in the FPLE, mentoring agreements, etc. But you might kind of point to, oh, soon we're going to be starting the CLE and we need to do X, Y, or Z documents, or there are particular kind of needs that the student has, and we might be paying attention to those here. But in the main, I think this will be a fairly brief section. Long and short-term plans, you might add goals. They may be many and various, and I anticipate particularly towards the end of the program, there might be some future planning about once a person has achieved their qualification and registered with Social Work England, what are their kind of future plans? What kind of area of practice are they interested in? And what do they need to do perhaps to get involved in that or get experience of areas of practice that they're most interested in? The last three sections here you can see are learner, employer, and academic feedback. Now, this is a very clear section where the employer and the apprentice might go in beforehand and give a general overview of their progress, how they feel they're getting along, are there any issues that need to be addressed, and so on and so forth. Perhaps even an additional comment after the review or towards the end of the review might be added at this point. The academic feedback, there's a couple of subsections in this, but as it's the academic is filling it in, I'm not really going to go through that, but suffice it to say that there's a general impression of progress and a couple of questions about attendance as a person being attending on the job and off the job learning. Now, as I said earlier, we'll go back to core topics, and I'll just go through the 5 of them one by one. And the first is safeguarding. Now, if you imagine, first of all, that Aptem covers a broad range of different apprenticeships. It's not all going to be about social work, which is, of course, our main concern. But in other apprenticeships, they may not be as aware of or familiar with safeguarding processes and procedures. So in this instance, you might say something like, as an experienced professional, the person is familiar with science of safeguarding concerns, relevant policies and procedures, kind of knows what to do. Basically, all the apprentices understand what safeguarding is because they're, working with that on a regular basis or have some experience of it. But of course, we're always trying to develop our knowledge, skills, behaviors in relation to safeguarding. And you might actually record something about what additional learning we're anticipating in the next year or so. I think it's probably a good idea if you consider, are there any personal issues for the apprentice? There are various different ways we ask questions about well-being and involvement with services and various other things in the mentoring agreements. So I think we should be asking that question here also. Question then remains, what will everyone do if there are concerns about the person's safeguarding? Well, we have well-rehearsed processes and procedures for managing any risk to individual apprentices. So if there were concerns, then we'd kind of rely on those policies and procedures. That kind of personal question might be a little bit difficult on occasion. I don't think it actually comes up very often, but it might do. But bear in mind that that personal question might be relevant for the other core topics also. So that we might ask a similar question for the other 4, I suppose, other topics. So the next thing up is prevent. It's obviously part of the government strategy. It's been around for quite a while. People generally know and understand what that's about. There's a link there where you can get the prevent duty guidance, the various kind of complexities of it, what happens if you make a prevent referral. Now, it doesn't come up very often, but I think it's likely perhaps to be more visible in some areas of practice than others. It really came in as a response to Islamist terrorist attacks in London quite a few years ago. It was Labour government at the time, and this and, in fact, British values, which comes up later, can be dated back to around that period. The cohort that Prevent are working with has changed quite a lot over the years. And now the dominant or the single biggest group being referred are far-right extremists. And they are now the biggest single group. It's usually young white men. Kind of shows how perhaps social conditions or contexts have perhaps changed over the years, and services respond perhaps differently to that. But, you could do worse than engage in your mandatory annual prevent training, which most local authorities provide and can be either face-to-face or online. And if you haven't accessed that so far, I strongly recommend do so ASAP. Health and safety, again, a similar sort of form of words as we use for safeguarding might be relevant here. But of course, health and safety may be a broad thing. It will encompass things like home visiting, lone working, things like that, which are generally very applicable to our apprentices. But in some contexts where, for example, you might be working with immune suppressed people, there are additional health and safety responsibilities, policies, guidance, rules, etc., relevant to the particular area of practice that an apprentice might be working in. We might have a bit of conversation about that. We'd also want to know, are there any particular issues for the apprentice that we need to take into account? And that might mean, for example, that we should be considering reasonable adjustments both in the workplace and at the university. So you get a general idea here. Equality and diversity is a core issue, factor, learning, experience within social work practice, and something that we actually talk about a lot. I suppose it might be a very interesting conversation here about what might that mean for the apprentice. And again, this is something that is unique to each individual learner. But as I said, this is core to our practice. And really what we need to be thinking about here, can we expand this discussion in a meaningful way? So instead of just thinking about equality and diversity, perhaps we could introduce the idea of equity, which basically means that all people should have similar outcomes and might require slightly different inputs to achieve the same ends. So something we talk about a lot, question banks might be an interesting thing, might bring a new kind of perspective, some new ideas or discussion points here, but I think we get the general idea. Central to social work practice and something that we should be talking about. British values is part of the Ofsted framework. As I said, it kind of goes back some years to previous Labour government. The actual British values, as outlined in the guidance, are democracy, the rule of law, individual liberty, mutual respect, and tolerance for different faiths and beliefs. Now, you might have a critical reading of British values in a number of different ways. You might ask, oh, is this uniquely British kind of values? Do other people have these values? You might ask about tolerance, for example. In my background, to tolerate something kind of has a slightly negative meaning of to put up with. It's not exactly celebratory, is it? But in any event, we could apply a bit of criticality to this. But for us, social work values, being a values-led profession, again, absolutely core to what we do. So do these British values, are they subsumed or contained within social work values? How do we make social work values activate, as it were? How do we practice them in the real world, as distinct from being theoretical concepts that might just exist in a textbook? Again, some question bank opportunities for discussion, new thoughts. new perspectives and reflections might be useful here. So the question banks, they're quite extensive, really, to be honest, and you might use them to generate discussion for each of the core topics because there are questions for each of the core topics. You could circulate these prior to the three-way meetings, and if the SRA or university tutor was so inclined, they might enter those questions into the 5 topics prior to the final review when they're actually generating the next review, as you could see. But I still think there should be more space for personalized discussion about what these themes might mean for individual apprentices. At the very end, there's a kind of finish button, surprise, surprise, big blue finish button. It generates a PDF, which the apprentice, mentor, and academic sign. Generally, you'll already have entered your signature into Aptem when you enroll. So it just generates a box at the end of the PDF that you kind of click, and it'll automatically generate the date. As I said, the next review can be generated or started by the SRA or the university tutor. Probably best to do that sooner rather than later, but I don't know how meaningful it will be to enter too much detail straight after you finish this one, because you need the passage of time to make it a little meaningful, perhaps. But I do think that this process will get quicker over time. We're all time pressured. Everybody's got lots to do, and by kind of going into the document beforehand, doing a little bit of prep, it'll probably make life easier for everybody. So that's the full sum total of Aptem and how to comply. There'll be another video about learning logs, a little bit more detail about that. As ever, ask questions of your module leader or SRA or a tutor who should be able to help you out. So thanks very much for your time today, and bye.